Hi guys.
Hello.
We are outside, not in the cabin because it is cold, but not particularly windy
It's
today.
very, very still.
And we've got...
It is about -5, I think.
Yeah, I think it said -5 this morning.
But no wind, so we don't mind.
As we have said many times, the cold weather means more storytelling, and so we want to talk about a specific, I guess, view or issue with storytelling. So we're going to talk about feminism in or on or around storytelling.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I have to say, this is the most, I don't know if I'm nervous, but I'm the most I feel like I'm on rocky ground already.
Yeah.
Because of the gender that I am. I feel like I shouldn't actually be, I might just not talk. It'd be a dull podcast.
You can talk, and I mean, I wouldn't say that I feel like I am not on rocky ground just because I'm female either, because there are so many issues, and depending on your sexuality, how you present, what gender you present as, all the rest of it, you're going to have a different view on the way that gender is shown in storytelling, in fairy tales or any kind of story.
I think I've come to it quite late though, because first thing is that older stories, because older societies in general more male dominant, and men would have things written down so things would move on. Men had the luxury to sit around and tell stories, so men would be the so I don't think I realised that there was any sort of imbalance until I was maybe like a teenager, until someone else pointed out have you noticed this about stories?
Oh,
and because when it's in your favour, you just kind of go okay, well that's the normal, isn't it?
Well, it's about the same as a female, you don't, and that's I think why it's important. That's why we have, we've chosen this topic because it's something we talk about anyway, right? So when we're talking about, you can tell a story today, I'm going to tell this, but I've got this issue with it or whatever. So this is something that we discuss probably every month or so, maybe, and it's exactly the same for women, I think, and that's why we discuss it, because you're telling these stories to children, and children don't automatically pick up on imbalances, injustices,
and
views
context
of a particular character.
That you go, this is a story from here. It's a 300-year-old story. It's probably got this.
So the issue I think that we often discuss is do you not tell that story? Like Sleeping Beauty, for example. Not that we've ever told Sleeping Beauty, but that's a really good example of one that's just
you should unpick it. It's crazy. And a friend of ours came to stay, and her daughter, who's 6, brought her own version of Sleeping Beauty and asked me to read it, and so I did, and it had been slightly updated. It was I think they're Penguin or Puffin, classic stories, and it was the same version that I'd had growing up in the 80s, and only slightly changed, but most of the dodgy stuff was still in it. And do you just go, no, I'm not going to read that, or do you read it and then challenge it? So when the prince kisses a woman who's asleep, who's never met him, who's clearly not giving her consent to that at all, do you read that and then go, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Kissing someone when they're asleep that you've never met before. And that was his first thought. Didn't try anything else first. I know what'll do it.
And she'll be so pleased about that she'll wake up and instantly marry him. That's, not only does that lift the magical spell on the whole kingdom, but, that is her dream too.
I wonder if it's to do with a lot of the stories. It's the same with history, isn't it? We follow the royal families and we follow people with land and wealth and power. And whether those people did live in a world where their actions weren't challenged. So it's not that, maybe people, the common people telling those stories would have gone, but it's a prince, isn't it? He can do what he wants. In the same way that the prince probably turned up at their village and they had to go, okay, here's all the wheat we've been saving. Oh, fuck, okay, you're the prince, but...
And maybe, arranged marriages amongst the upper classes, maybe that is less
because romantic marriage is quite a new thing in a lot of places. Not everywhere, but it is quite I don't know, I guess it's interesting. But I guess that thing that comes onto the first bit that I wrote down from that Independent article. We got the 5 things, and it was one of them was what was it? It was like marriage or relationships as being like the reward. That is the happy ending is, which it kind of challenges a lot of things, because I think culturally, if I think of fairy tales, in my head they're immediately castles and princesses and that Middle Ages time period.
Yeah.
At which point, being paired with someone in whatever way, arranged, romantically, whatever, probably a massive economic, stability kind of thing. So it would have been quite a relieving, she's married, he's married, that family carries on, the farm's got someone to do whatever.
Totally, you've got the kids to help you out on the farm, whereas if you don't have those, your
line continues.
And just in terms of day to day, you don't have those workers for you to help you get the food in. You're basically going to starve. Whereas now, again, if children are persistently hearing these kind of fairy tale, and they married and they lived happily ever after, and they married, whether you're male or female, gay or straight, that whole kind of perception of and that's the goal. You get married and then everything's okay.
There's no more to be said after that because you've achieved it.
Yeah, and so if you don't get married, you're basically you failed. You failed at life. You are, as a single person, you're not you're not successful. You don't get that happy ever after, which is such a, I think, just the drip feed of that kind of mentality for children is, can be very damaging if your life doesn't work out that way, either through choice or through fate.
And through lots of stories, the male part of if any story that ends, I think, with they married and happily ever after, it's very rare. I can't think of an example where it's the man who has worked and strived and it's his reward.
I don't know, actually. I kind of think that is a little bit of a balance in terms of for the man also, that is just done it now. That was my aim. My aim was to snare beautiful women. I think about all those all the myths about all the Greek stuff about men kind of on challenges to women are given as a reward for hard work, for challenges. That is just I did all those things and then I got the beautiful virgin. And again, that's a really, just not just for girls but for boys to have that kind of message of that's what you do and you do it. I think that's because remembering was that feminism is not about women, it's about equality for men and women. So those messages that we're giving to boys are equally important.
But it does lead into that thing, doesn't it, of female characters being objects rather than fleshed out 3D characters with motives. It's kind of assumed for a lot of characters that they're either the princess, the I was going to say heroine, but very rarely a heroine, but more
I don't know. So I was rereading Angela Carter's Bloody Chamber yesterday. So that's she rewrote lots of fairy tales from a feminist perspective, and it's awesome. Very, very sensual, very dark. Very
Are they
bloody.
for children?
No, they're not for children in any way.
Okay.
They're for adults.
Right.
But you could, after you read that, you kind of look at some of the female characters. So Red Riding Hood, for example, could be seen as actually quite a gutsy female character, and she rewrites Red Riding Hood twice in this collection of short stories, and in one of them Red Riding Hood just has this awesome magical power before she even starts out. So she describes her as she's just hit puberty, but she's a virgin, and she's just got this aura of magic around her because she's alone in the forest wearing this bright red hood and cloak, and she's almost so powerful because she holds all of, do you know what I mean, female kind of mystery inside of her. And she's got her knife, she's got her hunting knife, and off she goes, and she meets this huntsman who is very saucy, and
it turns out that he actually is a werewolf. So she knows that the worst wolves are the ones that are hairy on the inside. But she kind of takes a bit of a liking to him, and he bets that he'll beat her to her granny's house.
Right.
Takes her basket with the knife in it, and she sticks to the path, and he's like, oh, I've got a compass, I bet I can beat you, and goes through the woods and does beat her and eats her gran.
Right.
Hides all of the evidence, and then she gets to the cottage, but she's really clever. She like looks around and she can see like a tiny bit of her gran's hair in the fireplace, and the Bible is closed, which her granny always reads, and she's never seen the Bible closed. It's always laid open at the page that she was reading. And she says, oh, what big eyes you have, all the rest of it, what big teeth you have, he still looks like a huntsman at this time. And he's like, all the better to eat you with. And she just laughs in his face because she knew she was nobody's meat. And then she sleeps with him and tames the wolf. And that's the end of the story, you know. And if you kind of look at the original story, you could view Red Riding Hood as actually quite a powerful, heroic figure. And it has been rewritten like by Roald Dahl and all those kind of things in that similar way, drawing a pistol from her knickers and shooting the wolf and all that stuff in them. Is it revolting rhymes or...
I think that's one of the interesting things is that we have this notion with a lot of like oral stories that the first time they were written down was the original. You know, like the Grimm's version is the original, but then there probably were retellings. And I was thinking about if I think of where kids get fairy tales from, and I think of like most people, my brain goes to Disney. I'm a child of the 90s, right? Disney was my introduction to all of those stories, you know, Sword in the Stone and Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and all. And by all accounts I could find, Walt Disney, massive misogynist, just product of his time, very in that kind of like 1950s, 1960s, you know, women are chattel and the man does the work and all that thing. And there's that thing of like, is it authorial intent? But I don't know whether it is, or whether it's like authorial, like lens. You know, like he is a product of the 1950s, and when he grew up, and so his retelling. Just like what was her name?
Angela Carter.
Angela Carter's retelling. She is a product of whenever 60s. She grew up, and you know all those things. But whether we don't examine that enough with children, we go, "This is the copy of so and such that we have, and that's the one that lives in your bookshelf." And I wonder whether
what's quite nice actually about oral storytelling that we do here, which I think we've talked about before, where because children probably are going to hear us telling the same story a few times. Like as a story I told this week, I was like, goodness me, that child who's been coming for a couple of years has probably heard me tell the story about 5 times now. And it's probably it's different every time we tell it, and that is actually a really great thing for them to hear, that actually it changes through the mouth. And also they might hear stories that you've told that I then tell the same story in a different way, like the one about the hippo that we used to tell. Do you remember that? I told that for ages. And that's really great. I mean, think about the learning that's happening from
massive.
That experience. You're kind of you're realising, you know, as you say, people are...
It's not fixed.
It's not fixed. Narratives aren't fixed. History isn't fixed. It all depends on who's telling it.
But where I was going was that I would say most children's books now, because there's quite a big... Culturally, we have quite a big thing about intellectual property, and that being, you know, this is so-and-so's version of this. And you don't get many people rewriting Roald Dahl stories or rewriting whatever. But what an impact it might have if you had 4 copies of Red Riding Hood even in the school library. Because I know lots of schools would go, have we got a copy of Red Riding Hood? Right, we'll buy 4 of the same copy and we'll put that in the library. And that's it, we've got that story. Whereas, is there anything to be gained from, let's get 4 different people's writing that story? I don't know. It doesn't really... It's not necessarily then to do with feminism, but it is to do with how different authors have interpreted a piece of work.
And I think that's actually interesting in terms of choosing a story to tell to children. So you or I will say, I want to tell a story. It goes like this. What do you think about it? And we might say, maybe like
tone down that bit or ramp up that bit, or how about you change it? We've had this discussion loads, haven't we? Let's change it so that at the end the girl doesn't just get given to the bloke or whatever, and that there is an argument, I think, for doing that and not going, just chuck that story in the bin. That is outdated. It's got nothing to say to today's world. It's just propagating this like negative stereotype of particular genders.
But also when children get older, to be able to, when they can understand that a little bit more, to maybe start with, we've talked before about stories where someone. Do you remember we went on the storytelling course, and there was a lady there who told us a story that her Ghanaian friend had told her.
Yes.
And the whole time it was this really nice, it's not a bookend, but it's like a framing device where she was suddenly removed and it was this Ghanaian person telling us a story. And that you might be able to tell what could be a very misogynistic story and go, this is from, about 500 years ago when men were in charge, and you can give a little bit more context before you start the story, which then becomes an interesting now we're almost time traveling, having an insight into what this was, rather than I'm going to tell you a story and it's a story that's relevant and modern today. Look, this isn't relevant necessarily, but it is an enjoyable ride.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you do that actually quite a lot when you're telling stories. You will comment on.
Oh, I break the fourth wall when I story tell.
Yeah.
Partly to give myself a break, so that I can jump out and go, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But also I do quite a lot, and I need to find another way of doing it. But it makes me really, really laugh when I'm telling a story, and I sort of go and the castle, and I because I'm in the, we've talked before about being in the story, and because I'm on the road in the story and I can see a castle over there, without thinking, I sometimes point, and then if I see a child, or better when it's an adult, turn round, and I have to break it and go, it's not actually there, mate, you're all right. But then I feel as soon as I do, I feel like it's quite a nice haha, we were all enjoying the story, but immediately I feel bad because I go, I've broken your immersion and I've pointed out that you were so I need to find a different way, maybe just a little nod to myself or something.
Maybe it's about going, thank you for looking, because it is there.
Rather
than
you can
not
see
there.
You can see it too. Numpty. We're in the way. Do you think girls and boys are interested in different stories depending on how, I was going to say gender neutral, but I'm going to say gender equal they are? Do you think boys are naturally more... We've talked before about how some stories work, at the end of the story you go, that might as well have been a girl. Yes. She didn't operate anything with her genitals, right? It might as well have been a girl who was a knight. But then there's some stories that only work because it's a girl, because she has to do certain things, or only work because it's a boy. And I wonder whether there's a thing where boys are more drawn to stories where the character could only do things a boy could do. There's never a girl troll in any of my stories.
No.
They are always boys. And that wasn't pre-planned. I just was thinking about characters and I realised that...
There is in Tuffy that I tell.
That's true, in your Tuffy story. Do you think bad characters... So I would say bad characters are either big, physically dominating male characters, trolls,
probably
werewolves, ogres. We are naturally very thick as a gender. Or...
thick and violent.
Thick and violent, or sneaky is the female trope for evil. Sneaky stepmother, sneaky witches. There's never a female character who's physically domineering,
No.
And there's very rarely a male character that's aggressively sneaky.
I guess in Aladdin, the male characters in that who kind of are tricksy, the lamp seller.
But I would say that whenever they're portrayed, a male character that is sneaky It's a bit like, have you heard that phrase that like poison is a woman's weapon?
No.
And people say that, and there's all this.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah. There's a very historical thing of like, if someone's poisoned, it's a cowardly thing because you haven't done
you haven't done it with your bare hands.
male sword and steel and whatever. But I would say if I think about sneaky characters, and again I'm going off Disney as a main reference, they're drawn feminine. They're drawn curvy. They're drawn very,
or
very
you
stick long hair on them and they could be a female character.
Yeah, it's true.
It's that idea, isn't it, that like perhaps women are cleverer. Maybe that's something that people have tried to. I'm just wondering whether that is the trope. Because
it's all kind of linked to like stuff like witchcraft issues and stuff as well, isn't it? It's like although actually lots of men were accused.
Witches are
lots of men were accused of being witches too. But scapegoating. So it's like women are feeble and worthless and weak until you really need somebody to blame. At which point they become evil, conniving with the devil. Very capable of doing great harm through sorcery or treachery or lies.
I was wondering whether it was historically how the genders would have risen to power. So a male, not necessarily a character, but a man in, I'm thinking Western history, rises through physical deeds. And there's very few. I'm thinking Boudica. Joan of Arc's not physical though, is she?
She is.
But not in the same sense as like someone like Genghis Khan or William the Conqueror.
And goes off to
That's
battle,
very sneaky and lying, isn't it?
I suppose, yeah.
So, but it's that thing of how would a woman have risen to power? It would have been that way, and how would
there's supposedly true historical stories of female characters, very upper class, castle owning type women, poisoning stepchildren so that their own heirs can rise and that kind of thing, which is very, you can actually believe that women would have had to have done that in those very brutal times.
And even like in Shakespeare, who's quite gender, I feel like he fleshed out a lot of female characters more than a lot of his contemporaries and a lot more than people had done before. But they're all poisoners and they're sort of like puppet masters. It's that matriarch. Sometimes
not
I think
all that way.
No,
but there are examples of that in Shakespeare for sure.
It's So I wonder. I wonder as well whether that then feeds in to, if I'm thinking of it from like a teaching point of view, in terms of schooling, girls. Because I've got to be so careful, haven't you, when you say this
girls,
stuff?
Yes.
Okay, so
in your
broad sweeping statements that do not encompass everyone. I have heard it said, that's what I'm going to do as a cop-out, I have heard it said that girls more naturally learn through communicating and talking and can learn from peers or process information that way, and that boys need a little bit more physical. I need to actually test it, I need to do that, I need to be hands-on, or at the very least I need to be like doing star jumps while I listen to you or something like that, and whether that's reinforced with girls are clever and boys are, in the story of a strong brutal warrior and a very clever female character, then you go, right, well that makes sense, doesn't it? Because us boys, we're out playing football and rugby and we're going and doing the thing, and the girls actually like reading and doing. There was a thing have you heard about reading frenzy?
No.
When books first became, it's like in the 1800s, and sort of books moved from being like a very sacred and mostly religious or very important books to being like, we can print Pride and Prejudice, and we can print novels for consumption. That there was a view with lots of men that because the women would just read it, a bit like people say now about TV, like it rots your brain and you're going crazy, that people thought that about books, and that it was a particularly female thing to do, because the upper classes could sit and read and do all that stuff. But I have heard that is the point at which, as a Western society, the upper classes developed more empathy.
Oh yeah,
because it gave you sudden access to so many more stories about people in different situations and the lower classes and people from history and all these things. Whereas before it would have been, these are the stories that my teacher told me, or these are the 3 books we have in our house, and whether there's something to do with, storytelling is a massive tool for teaching empathy.
Yeah.
And whether the fact that they are all so male dominated, or not all, that's such a sweeping statement, isn't it? A lot of the stories are male dominated, whether that opens up more conversation for female empathy, and whether you can use that as a massive tool then for boys that you're teaching, not just to go like, oh right, did you like the story, it was good that he won, but go like, right, let's talk about the other people. How do you think they felt at the end of the story? How do you think she felt at the end of the story? And whether that feeds in. Was there any other...
I was just going to add that we often talk about the kind of stories that we choose to tell, and you tend to go for older stories or more kind of folk tales or fairy tales or myths. And I quite like, especially with younger children, trying to adapt more modern picture books into a spoken tale. And I think part of the reason I do that is because there are more balanced views of gender in those stories, or it somehow is less about gender and more just about the story.
About
they
the
are
tiger
more like
and how much he eats. It's important.
For ages, actually, about the difference between frogs and toads. And the characters are more interchangeable. They could be, like you say, they can be male or female. It really doesn't matter. It's just about the relationship between characters,
the journey, the
story.
Yeah, the tiger that came to tea could be a little boy.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Although there's actually quite a lot of gender in that story, and people have taken the mickey out of it and rewritten it with the same pictures with So they've rewritten it like because Daddy only turns up near the end.
That's true.
Turns up from work, and the mum is like, the tiger.
There's been a tiger in the fucking house all day.
Tigers. It's not my fault. Yeah, the tiger did it. The reason the house is a tip is because the tiger did it. The reason you've got no dinner, sorry Daddy, that I haven't made you dinner.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it's massively gendered. And the dad's like, I can solve this by going out and throwing money at the problem. Let's just go to a cafe and have sausages and I'll have beer. The tiger drinks all Daddy's beer in that story.
Oh wow.
It's very, very, I don't know if it's the 60s story or 70s. 70s probably, or early 80s. Anyway, but yeah, there are people who've rewritten it. You should Google it. It's really funny. Of like, it's all through Mummy's viewpoint. She's having a complete nervous breakdown. So she's having like this vision of this tiger, and the tiger is the manifestation of her complete like psychological breakdown due to her repression as a housewife and all the rest of it. And then there's another one told as if she's an alcoholic and like she's drunk all the beer and like said that the tiger did it. So Daddy comes home yet again to find that tiger has drunk all the beer.
That is a story you'd come up with after all the beer though, isn't it? You'd be like, a tiger, it must have been a tiger.
Yeah, and they just use the same pictures but with different
do you know what actually that's made me think about there was a story that we heard. I won't say who told it, although it was an enjoyable story. Someone told a story at one of the Southwest Forest School gatherings, not the last one, the one before, and it was about a postman who went and found magic bags, and he came back as a to try and impress the princess. And so in the first day he finds a bag, and it's like a policeman's hat or something, and he goes and pretends to be a policeman, and she's not impressed, and then he goes finds a different bag, and then a different bag, and a different bag, and eventually the bag's empty, and he tries to be himself, and she loves him.
Right.
But then I was thinking, if you saying that, and I was going in my head, I was going, right, well, there's some nutty, persistent man who keeps turning up at her house in a different hat, just going like, I'm a different person now. Yeah. And then at the end, because he's not wearing a special hat, she's like, no, again.
Because he's just the loon with no disguise.
Yeah, and this weird like, you should just pester her though.
Yeah, exactly.
Like pestering her was not a problem.
So many stories like that.
Mental.
So many stories.
Mental.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you think we've waffled?
We've waffled
successfully.
To Kingdom Come.
I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Oh no.
Because next week, we said we were going to talk about books.
Oh yeah.
So next week, we're going to do non-violent communication.
Okay, great.
By is it Michael Rosenberg? No.
Oh, we need to get his name right.
We need to get his name right. Non-violent communication by
Marshall
Rosenberg. It is a cracking book.
I think I have 2 hours left on Audible.
Okay, I was going to say it's on Audible and it's very well read.
Listening at 1 1/4 speed.
Yeah, listen fast.
Which is definitely doable.
Listen fast because he talks very
slowly.
Considered.
Yeah.
Get on with it. I got it.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting book. So next week, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay, great.
Magic. What else do we need to say? Christmas is coming up and spaces are running out for the cooking day at the end of January. And there's also all our other training days spread out throughout the year. Anything else you want to add?
No. Happy Christmas.
Magic. Well, we'll see him again for Christmas.
Okay.
Right. Bye.
Bye.